This edition is brought to you by our sponsor, which is the Head of the Charles Regatta program. And this program is part of the Faster Masters Rowing membership program, the individual or annual membership. And if you are training specifically for the Head of the Charles program, you can join at fastermastersrowing.com/programs. And part of our regular monthly individual program right now focuses on the Head of the Charles Regatta program. There's also a program if you are training for the Visa World Masters, or you are training for a head race that happens later in October or November. So if you are interested in our Head of the Charles program, again, go to fastermastersrowing.com/programs, and you will see the program in the individual membership. So I would like to welcome Jess DiCarlo. Hi, Jess. How are you?
Hi, Marlene. I'm good.
And Jess is with us this month to bring our regular feature, which is the book of the month. And her book this month is called Rowing Through the Barbed Wire Fence by Rima Caroline. And tell us a little bit about the book, Jess, and why you chose this book.
So I'd had this book for, I don't know, a few months, and it's about a group of rowers, Lithuanians, although it takes place from 1961 roughly until through the Tokyo Olympics in 64, the first one.
Yeah, I was going to say, wow, that's a pretty, wow, until Tokyo Olympic, that's a really long period of training, isn't it? So from like 1961 to 1964, right? Okay.
Yeah. And so I hesitated to read it because I knew at the time Lithuania was part of the Soviet Union, and I was afraid it would be upsetting, but it really wasn't. And then sort of when things happened with Ukraine, and I thought, oh, I need to read this book to try to understand the world better, because my history knowledge is pretty lacking. So I learned a lot with this book, and I actually read it quite slowly at the beginning. I was looking up history and events and things like that. So so the main action is the main character, who was a real person, his name was Povilas Lutkaitis, and he was a Lithuanian rower. I believe he passed away now, but his daughter wrote this book, Rima. And I wasn't sure at first, but I looked it up, and it is the case that that's his daughter. And she was a rower, so you're getting a good perspective from that point. But so he has a somewhat sad family history. His parents were friendly with the Lithuanian nationals who didn't want to be a part of the Soviet Union, and so he was, because of their involvement and his sister's involvement, his father was taken to a gulag for, in prison for 10 years, and then 5 years of exile. Same with his sister. But so because of their involvement, he was small at the time, and so it was him, and he had 3 other siblings. I think they were all boys besides his sister, who were left in Lithuania. And so they were sort of kept from traveling. There's this word that I thought was very interesting. I mean, it's just the word that means they were forbidden from traveling abroad. It's Nevyedznosh.
Well, at that time in the Soviet Union, no one could travel abroad. I mean, you could not. I mean, during the Soviet time, no one was allowed to travel abroad unless they had what was called an exit visa. So at that time, nobody could just freely travel abroad. Anyone who traveled abroad needed permission. So whether they were an artist or an athlete or, or an
Hmm.
individual, you had to have special permission during the Soviet era to travel abroad, which was why it was difficult for many people to leave.
Yeah. Well, he couldn't get permission for the first half of the book, at least.
Was
The action was whether.
that as an athlete or
Yes.
uh-huh.
Yeah, he wasn't permitted, and there was this organization that it was sort of like part of the military, but it was sort of like, if you were part of this organization, you were considered like okay. And he
Mm-hmm.
wasn't a part of that, but he was just a regular guy. He wasn't involved in politics, with the exception of what had happened to his family. But
Mm-hmm.
so finally, the story of how random it seemed that him and a couple other athletes on his team who were in the same position with having um, family members or pasts that were deemed suspicious.
Mm-hmm.
They ran into somebody at the airport, and there was this woman. She was sort of a celebrity, her and her husband. And I wrote her name down, but now I can't find it, of course. But they made friends with her flying into Moscow one time for a competition. And this woman introduced them to this high up political guy. And they said, oh, he wished them luck in rowing. But they said, oh, we're having trouble getting permission. And so he cleared their papers. They had to go in, Pavulas and his coach. What was his coach's name? It was like basically Ricardus.
Mm-hmm.
Had to go in and be interviewed. And that reminds me, the funny thing is that Ricardus, he was their coach, but he's also in the 8.
Oh, interesting. He was their coach, but he was rowing
He
in the boat as well. So,
Yeah, he was the stroke, I believe, because maybe not. I'm not 100% sure if he was a stroke, but Ricardus Vaitkevicius.
mm-hmm.
And so anyway, lo and behold, they got permission because they ran into the right person at the airport. And they got booted from the 8 because they didn't want all Lithuanians in the 8. The 4, it was a straight 4 that they ended up rowing in the Olympics. And I believe they were all Lithuanians with the exception of one.
Was this
Or
for
maybe
the
they
for
were, but
the was this for the Tokyo Olympics? So
yeah.
they were representing the Soviet Union in the Tokyo Olympics, but did they go to Moscow like for selection to select for the boats for the Olympics?
Yes, the selection was a little bit murky, but it was based on races, and they were at different points were forced to mix in Russian rowers, but it became clear that the boat went better with these, most of the boat being the guys who had rowed together for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I forget the name of the regatta where they were actually selected.
At that
But I
time,
think it,
yeah, at that time, I mean, during the time of the Soviet Union, they only had one team that represented the whole country. So they would have had at that time, selection would have involved athletes from Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Belarus,
mm,
Ukraine, Georgia, um, all the Moldova, all the republics of the Soviet Union. So they could have, they could have been, they could have been seat raced and then had combined boats, for example, because, for example, at that time, um, Kiev had a very, very strong school of rowing during that era, and so that would have been one. Kiev Dynamo would have been one club that it would have been very strong. And then like here, if they came
Oh,
from,
yeah.
if they
They
came from
talked about that.
yeah, if they came from Lithuania, for example, they would have maybe had a very strong club system. But in order to go to the Olympics, there would only be, say, one team that represented the Soviet Union. So it could have been, for example, like a four could have won the trials, and it might have been their four, for example, from their club, but they could also have um, athletes from all of the different republics, at that, because at that time there was only one team. So
Yeah, he did talk, or the author talked at one point about going to training camp, as the national team or the union
mhm,
team, um, and that was once they were. It was once they were selected, or still when they were deciding.
mhm.
But that must be very difficult because that's quite a big area. I mean, you see it now with distributed camps or distributed clubs versus one unified national training center, and it seems to go back and forth.
Yes, well,
Um,
yeah, at that time, after, the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, and so all of these republics that were part of the Soviet Union are became independent countries. So then they all have their own national teams now. So that's why, of course, in the Olympics you will see, in the the modern times now, you will see that each Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, they all have Russia, they all have their own Olympic teams. But at that time they were all just one. So, it actually,
yeah,
was extremely competitive, I would say, from such a huge sports system to have to make one team for so many people, it had to be incredibly competitive.
do you think that era of the 60s, the early 60s in particular, uh, was within that extremely competitive era? Like, was there?
Well, during the Soviet time, um, sport science was very, very developed. Um, and a lot of the athletes, they lived in camps, they trained practically full time. Maybe they weren't officially
Mhm.
professionals, but the training methodology and system was very, very intense, very competitive. Because you've got so many people competing for a few spots. um, so of course
Yeah,
it drove the competitive level. I think was really extreme. To um, on all levels. Like if you think of gymnastics or row, I think every sport, cross country skiing, everything I think was extremely, extremely competitive. But it was also, um, if you were a member of the team, it was also a level of life that had a lot of privileges to it as well, right? So,
yeah.
there was incentive to be at the top of your sport for sure. There was definitely motivation to do that.
That was mentioned in the book. The members of the eight got apartments,
Hmm.
special apartments, but it didn't go into that a whole lot. But yeah.
What
So, there's.
I was going to say, for Remo, kind of what do you think her main message was in the book? Like what inspired her to write this book, because it's quite a big book, it's quite a detailed book.
Yeah, yeah. I felt very close. Like, I mean, obviously, I don't know. I've never met her or spoken to her, but to me, she's a rower too, and
Hmm.
she seems totally obsessed with rowing, like in a good way, in the
Yeah.
same way that I am. I mean, she rode. I she was on the national team, and I can't remember her results, but I think she rode at the international level,
Hmm.
and but she 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 moved to, do you know this city Trakai in
Trakai,
Lithuania?
yes, 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 of course. And there have been
So
sometimes there are there's an international rowing course in Trakai, and sometimes there's international races there as well.
well, I think in 62 was the first Amber Oars regatta,
Hmm.
and that was a big deal for them. I don't know if it's still held now, but they, throughout the book, they held it every year after that. And so she now she moved to Trakai from I'm forgetting where the family was from in Lithuania, but she runs a private club and a hotel,
Mm.
and she calls it a rowing hotel,
Oh,
and you can see
cool.
pictures online.
Uh-huh.
And of course I want to go there now. So
Yes.
I mean, it's everything is rowing, and it's beautiful. I hope I get to go there someday. So I mean, as to what prompted her to write the book, I think she did talk about that. I think it was some external reading. I don't think it was in the book.
Hmm.
She did an interview with somebody, might have been Row 2K or Rowing News, but just that she never talked to her father about it before he passed away. And I think it was, she and I are probably the same age, like 51. And I'm developing this strong desire to know the stories of my family, because my
Hmm.
grandfather was an immigrant, and all my grandparents were, didn't have English as their first language. So as I get older, I I have more and more respect for what it must take to be an immigrant, and what you have to go through and how hard it must be. And so I can only assume that that was a similar motivation for her.
Hmm.
Um,
To know more about
and
her, like her father's, just the history and
yeah,
how he trained, and how how he was successful in rowing, and did he
yeah,
make the four that went to the Olympics finally?
he did. And they were disappointed in their results. Um, I think they, I think they won the petite final,
Hmm.
but the I've heard this at other regattas, that the course was not very fair. Um, the protected lanes were 5 and 6, I believe, and if it was pretty much across the board that lanes 6 took first place, lane 5 took second, and so on through the lanes. And they had no system. That the Japanese really tried very hard to build is it called a wave attenuator? Is that what
Yes,
that's
yeah,
called?
yeah, 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 exactly. Something that if there's a crosswind, they'll build like it might be like a break wall or something that tries to prevent a crosswind, for example, to protect the lanes, to make them as fair as they can. For example, they have one in Sarasota, for example. They have it's like a
Oh, okay.
wall. It's like a wall that goes out, that divides the main race course from, say, the practice area.
Yeah, I know they built one for the 2020 Olympics, and I couldn't really tell what it was just from watching on television. But anyway, they hung up a curtain in an effort, like hundreds of people, she said, hung up this curtain right before the game started because, oh, I forget who was the FISA president at the time. I don't remember. It couldn't have been Keller, but anyway, they really did make the effort to try to make it fair, but it wasn't. So Yeah, and I mean, they did well, but of course not as well as he would have wanted. But that was his one Olympics, Povilas, because he ran afoul of the government. He was also a photographer, which she has published another book of all his
Hmm.
photographs from Tokyo that he took. And just at the end of the book, he and one of his friends met some Australians, and they snuck out at night to go to a party with the Australians.
Oh God.
And he took, he had his camera with him. I don't know if he talked about his camera not being good enough to get good night shots, but this was the Olympics, by the way, where the Japanese had to, because they kept postponing races because of the weather, they had no lights. And so the
Oh,
final
okay.
race, which was the 8, they shot up flares
Oh
to
gosh.
light up the last 500 meters. I mean, it gives me chills just to think of it. And at the whole time I'm reading this book, I'm thinking, oh, is the 8 going to win?
Right.
And then I'm forgetting that I know who won the 8th race, and that was the US. This
In
was
1960, yes,
1964.
in 1964. And in fact, my double is named William Connect, and Bill Connect rode in that
Uh,
1964 boat. So, yes, and Bill Stowe, and yes, there was that. Yeah,
yeah,
the
boy.
result of it. But it's
Yeah,
interesting to know, to read the story about uh, other people who were in that event, right? And
it
from another
is.
country,
Yeah.
another era.
Yeah. And, in the Soviet Union 8, they came, I think, 5th place, and they were devastated because they had the speed. But 2 days before the, I think before the opening ceremony, 1 or 2 days before, the coach, and his name was Samsonov, I believe.
Hmm.
I didn't get a chance to Google him. I don't know if he was a famous coach, but he made them. They were exhausted, and the one friend of Pavilas asked, his back was hurting, and he said, "Can we not train today?" And he spoke up, which was unusual, but the coach said, "Okay, we'll do the starting sprint, and then we'll do a finish sprint, and that's it."
Hmm.
Well, when they got out on the course, he made them row 2,000 meters. They did it in 5:54, and that was the world. I think it was a world record at that time. They did it in practice,
Hmm.
and the friend's back was so terrible that they just had nothing left for the final. And so that's, I think, feeds in a little bit to the topic of the day, which is discipline.
Yes, well, yeah, absolutely. Like, if um, what do you think, if you had to say, like, one thing that impressed you as a big takeaway from this book, what would it be?
um well, the one boat from the Soviet Union that won a gold medal was I believe it was the pair,
Uh-huh.
not the double. Could have been the double, but they were the only ones who refused to do the coaches training because they were
Interesting.
exhausted, and they won.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
um so yeah, big takeaway from the book. It's I mean, again, every time I read a rowing book, what I love is feeling connected to rowers from any era, hundreds of years ago. I just like, I mean, that's how I feel about rowing.
Mm-hmm.
I feel connected to everybody, which is a little rose tinted glasses, but honestly, that's how I feel. And I came away feeling like that, and just, how I would really like to meet the author, and, um, you know, just see more rowers in other countries. And so that's kind of my takeaway.
Yeah, well, and their stories, because that's one thing we don't know, right? As viewing a regatta or an Olympic final or any championship regatta, every person has a story of how they got
Yes.
to that seat and why they're sitting in that seat or not sitting in that seat. And those are the things that are interesting, that what how did that person get to that point, what brought them to that point. And those are the things that we don't know unless somebody shares that with us, right? You don't know what
Yeah.
somebody's
Yeah.
story is. And one
Yeah.
of the for those people who are interested, on our website, on the fastermastersrowing.com, we have a page called the best rowing books of 2020. And with Jess's help, we keep adding books, and it's actually one of the most visited pages that we have, because obviously masters rowers like reading. So we definitely appreciate that. And Jess is finding good books for us from all different walks of life, so to speak. But today's topic, one of our podcast topics today is practicing the art of discipline. And again, when we go back to the stories of how elite athletes achieve what they achieve, or any of us achieve what we achieve, there is some element of discipline in there. And when you hear the word like the art of discipline, what comes to your mind?
Um, well, the first thing that came to my mind when I read the topic was the book by Mike Livingston, and it's called, it's something, discipline is in the title. I can't
It's
remember
mental
the title
discipline.
right
Yeah,
now.
mental discipline. Yes.
Okay. Well, this is the book that was referenced by one of the books of all books of rowing, which is Assault on Lake Casitas by
Mm-hmm.
Brad Lewis. And he mentions this book and how pivotal it was for him as an athlete in the '84 Olympics. And Mike Livingston, who wrote the book, was it the '72 US 8? I can't remember. But anyhow, he's a rower too. And I have the book, but have not yet read it. So that's the first thing I thought of. But discipline, I struggle with consistency. And so that's sort of what was rattling around in my head, like the
Mm-hmm.
difference between consistency and discipline. And thinking about the Soviet rowers, and when you tell your coach, I need to rest. I mean, I have yet to meet a rower who is like really okay with that. I mean, you might have
Mm-hmm.
come to that eventually, but it's a very blurry line, and I don't think I'm good at it. Like, I don't know. I don't think I'm
Oh.
disciplined.
Well, you're honest about it. Well, I think there's there's some different ways to view discipline. I mean, one, we can look at discipline like it is simply the practice of an art, right? So you can look at rowing as a discipline. You can look at painting as a discipline, or
Uh,
any sport. You can look at it as a discipline of something that you do on a regular basis. um, then you can think about, I think the art of discipline, like you said, is connected to consistency. And I think that it will stem from commitment. I think we all experience this as athletes, or just in life. Um, if we decide to do something, we make a commitment to it. And if we make a commitment to it, then it's much easier for us to be disciplined about our choices. Because I think discipline is something that everybody has different variations of discipline. Like, there are the people who are the really strict rule followers, right? So whatever the rule is, they do that. That's their discipline. They follow everything to a T. There are the people who are the 80-20 kind of people, right? So and I personally believe, if you are 80% in, whether it's your diet, your habits, your training, if you're an 80-20 kind of a person, I think that, I think you're going to be successful generally. Because sometimes 100%, some people need 100%, but sometimes 100% is too extreme for many people to maintain consistency. And overall, I think discipline is connected, in my own opinion, is connected to consistency. So, if you can be pretty consistent over the long term, I think you're going to get where you want to get to, as long as you have a vision of what that is. I think when you don't have any discipline, no, maybe for some people their goals aren't clear. Maybe maybe it doesn't work for everybody. I'm not a perfect psychotherapist here, but maybe it doesn't work perfectly for everybody. But I do think that there are always times. Discipline is when you perform, and sometimes it's difficult. There's always going to be times when you don't want to do it, but you have to, or it's part of the consistency, and that, which I think is different from, for example, when I need to rest today, I need to recover today, I need to, that I don't think that that's necessarily going against discipline, but I think discipline fits into the bigger picture of having a goal, and it helps you make little decisions all along the day. Like, for example, if our goal is to perform in XYZ regatta, and you have to row lightweight, right? It's going to help you decide about your diet the 6 months before. It's going to help you decide on your training program. So, I think commitment and discipline probably goes hand in hand somewhat. But some people are quite successful with their own form of I don't think there's necessarily one form of discipline, but I do think it's a regular practice. And that's where, like, I think habits fit in there, or accountability, like the team, that can be a big factor as well.
Yeah,
you
definitely.
know I think some people need the accountability factors, because they will be accountable to a team and to other people more than they will be accountable to themselves. So
That's me 100%.
so, but it's an important, I think it's an important realization, just to know that about yourself, to know that, hey, I'm really good at training by myself, but I want that Saturday morning practice where I go and I compete with other people. Or that it's really hard for me to do XYZ on my own, so I like to have a training partner, I like to have a team. And I think knowing that about yourself is quite important.
Yeah, and I think you're right what you said. And I've asked you this before, like, I never missed practice when I was on the team, like, ever. Like, well, when I was really sick.
Right.
But that was like once or twice. And I cannot train on my own. Like, I've gotten better, I've gotten a lot better, but still it's that clarity of the goal that really helps.
Yes.
Um and it's also knowing how hard it is to train on your own. It helps build in, like you said, habits.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
That
And people to just, get support, just to get support and go through, if you have certain struggles, everybody needs a little bit, like, okay, maybe you need a little extra rest today, or, okay, maybe let's just go out and do this. We can do this. You know what I'm saying? So, having those people who can definitely support you and help you, I think helps with the discipline. That's the
yeah.
accountability. And actually, I think we wrote about that in this month's Faster Masters program. I think Rebecca wrote a really good article about having an accountability partner and how that helps. And I think knowing what you need to perform better, and definitely, makes a difference, and it helps. And if you need it, and
Yeah.
I think most people do, especially when the going gets tough. Most people do need it. So, I
Yeah.
look at discipline as, creating good habits, consistency. Um, but I think what fuels that discipline is also, just having a goal. And the goal doesn't have to be the Olympics. The goal could be, I want to row 3 times a week, or I want to, do this regatta with my team. It can be, there are lots of different levels of goals that can still help us build discipline and give us some structure and predictability to our day. We all need that, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. And if I ever read that mental discipline book, I'll do a review on that one. I'll give it a
yes,
whirl sometime.
yes. It's quite an intense book. I have it myself, and maybe that's our winter reading project, right? Once we're off the
Yeah.
water, I think. And well, I would like to. I'm Jess, thank you for being with us. And Rebecca will be back with us next week, but her book was called Rowing Through the Barbed Wire Fence by Rima Caroline, and it is available on Amazon. And we will have a link to the book in the show notes when we publish that. And I'm going to say thank you to everybody. This has been Faster Masters Rowing Radio, the show dedicated to masters athletes who want fun, fitness, and confidence in their rowing. So become a student of the sport and a Faster Masters Rowing program subscription today at www.fastermastersrowing.com/join. And thank you, everyone, for being with us. And thank you, Jess.
Bye, everyone. Bye, Marlene.
Bye, Jess.